Welcome to Capital Matchmaking, the first video. So let's start by the introduction of why I created this program and the reason why I think it's important for you to pay attention. So a lot of people have been going out there trying to raise their money, capital, whether for their business, whether for be an investment or a fund. And I think it's great. You know, people want to pursue the entrepreneurial dream. Sometimes they want to expand their existing business and take it to the next level. And with all that said, there's a lot of discrepancies in terms of how they approach capital raising in general. Now, obviously, people go through their personal credit, they try to restore that, they use that, and they guarantee it. And I think that's quite risky because at the end of the day, what ends up happening is if you guarantee it through your personal credit, you're going to be liable directly. And that's not a position that I would encourage anybody to be in. And of course, you guys know that I talk quite a bit about personal credit on this channel. So with that, with my observations and the recent incidents in capital raising, I've noticed quite a few individuals out there that are actually miscommunicating the whole element of capital raising. It's no longer like the old school Wall Street days where you just pick up a book of investors and start dialing out and call every single one of them, hoping that somebody's going to get convinced on investing with you or your business. And the fact of the matter is, the more you do that, the more repelled the investors would be. They will feel defensive right away. That defensive mechanism will come up right away because it's the traditional way of doing things. A lot of people are thinking, hey, the cold calling approach works. The approach to take works. I'm going to guarantee get myself investors. It's a question of numbers, and that was the old school way. That's no longer relevant today, especially in capital matchmaking today. Today's strategy revolves around giving up on conformity. It's the death of conformity, which is our first video. So the death of conformity comprises of understanding that we're no longer in the old school Wall Street days. That means that anything that automatically triggers defenses for investors are things that we have to fight against, are things that we have to start hating deep inside so that we don't repeat the same processes and mistakes that those individuals are making. And in order to make sure that that's done properly, we have to think about the avant-garde way of doing things, being more creative, having a solution that actually, makes sense and it's tailored to a specific investment group's need or an investor's need. So I'll give you an example of that, right? If you have a specific type of company, let's say you're in biotechnology, for instance, right? A lot of us, what we do is we tend to go ahead and try to find these biotechnology investors, and we try to continue that by simply working with different investment banks. Sometimes we work with different institutions. Sometimes we try to, pick up conversations by going at meetings and conferences. And the unfortunate truth to that is even that itself is the old school approach. Now, you might be wondering to yourself, well, listen, I'm here to raise money. Definitely, I want to go out in conferences. I want to communicate with investors. I want to sit with them. I want to touch base with them. I want to make some money here. And I think that's the best approach. And, just a few years ago, that was fine. But nowadays, what investors look for is thought leaders. They actually look for individuals who are very good at what they do. And they have to have a status of high position, right? And the low position status is when you start going out there and you try to build rapport, you try to, work on building relationships, and you try to do all these type of things and try to build relatability. Now, for most of us, we've heard that rapport building is critical. We have to when it comes to, doing business the proper way. But nowadays, when you start doing that, what's happening is you're actually starting to seek approval. And when you do that, you come from a low status position. When you start seeking approval from other individuals, especially investors, when you know for a fact, or you have a very solid business model, something very good that is quite investable, you should absolutely use that to your advantage, and you have to structure it so that you actually come from a high status position. And in order to do that, you cannot conform to the regular ways of doing things. You have to set the agenda. You have to explain exactly the story behind it, the big idea. And that's what the death of conformity is all about. So before you start anything in terms of capital raising or going for a capital raising campaign, you start with that. You start with your setup. You start with the idea, the big idea, why it's relevant today, right? What's new about this idea? Why is it exciting or potentially dangerous if we don't pay attention to it? And then from that perspective, create the narrative behind which type of investors you want to go for, schedule meetings, and keep a deadline. And once the next steps are integrated, where, for example, you have a follow-up meeting that needs to kind of be concluded in terms of whether or not they want to look into this, what kind of due diligence they want to do. In those circumstances and situations, rapport building is actually quite useful. But prior to that, don't go for the traditional way of doing things, try to bank on that and think that it's going to work. And it's definitely not the law of large numbers, because investors are not just individuals that you call up when you need money. They actually can back you. They can pretty much partner up with you for future transactions. I think is quite useful. Most of us don't realize that. When I was younger, when I first got into the investment banking world, that's the same mistake I've made. And I've come to learn through that, dealing with family offices and institutional funds and accredited investors alike. And I came to understand that those are some of the mistakes that I had to avoid. So that helped me raise hundreds of millions of dollars. Not only that, we've done some really nice real estate projects. We've done some biotechnology, waste to energy, gold mining, several other things. And I think that's the critical component that we have to understand, right? It's the perspective that the old school way of Wall Street banking is done. You have to kill conformity, and you have to work with a structure, the narrative, the idea, and make us or the investors realize the significance of that idea that you have and structure it that way. Go from that perspective, right? So I hope that you understood why conformity no longer works, especially trying to imitate or emulate the old school way of doing things when it comes to capital raising. And let's go over to the second video shortly after this.